Welcome to Unmasked, the CCI Anesthesia podcast, the show where we dive deep into the world of anesthesia practice improvement, quality enhancement, and the evolving landscape of healthcare. I'm Kieran Zumwalt, your guide on this journey, as we explore the strategies, innovations, and stories that shape the future of anesthesia care. In an era where healthcare demands greater accountability and clarity, transparency has become more than just a buzzword. It's a powerful tool for building trust, driving operational efficiency, and improving outcomes across the board. But what does this mean for hospital executives? How does a transparent anesthesia practice directly benefit decision-making, financial performance, and collaboration within a healthcare system? Sit back, relax, and get ready for an insightful conversation on the power of transparency in anesthesia practice management. We'll answer these questions and more. Today we're joined by Alex Gorecki. Alex is the president of CCI Anesthesia. He has over 25 years of senior level practice management and consulting experience, focusing on improving operational and financial performance at nearly 400 healthcare facilities nationwide. Alex, welcome to Unmasked.
Hey Kieran, thanks for having me.
Joining Alex is Nathan Yoder. Nathan has over 25 years of experience in anesthesia, radiology, hospitalist, and emergency medicine services. He has served in leadership roles for several healthcare companies in process management, business development, credentialing, risk management, recruiting, staffing, CRM development, and operations, just to name a few. Currently, Mr. Yoder is an executive vice president at CCI Anesthesia. Welcome to the program, Nathan.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
So Alex, let's start with a broad question. Why is transparency such a critical factor in anesthesia practice management today?
Well, I think there's two big factors. So the federal government is constantly pushing for more transparency from hospitals. The House of Representatives, they have their Healthcare Price Transparency Act that they have a couple bills that they're working on with that. In the Senate earlier in January 2024, they had their own Healthcare Price Transparency Act 2.0, they called it, because they have to be better than the House, I guess. And so those two are working on ways to have more transparency in pricing. And so if I'm a hospital CEO, I'm saying, well, gosh, if the federal government's holding me more accountable for transparency, I'm going to hold my partners, my ED, emergency medicine group, my hospital medicine group, and in this case, my anesthesia group, hold them more accountable for transparency as well for what my hospital's paying for. So there's a general culture of transparency that's becoming more and more relevant in the market, and the expectation just continues to increase on that transparency. The other part is from a pure practice management perspective, we've seen over the years a lot of private equity investors that came into the market, and particularly in anesthesia. And there's always an assumption that if you have private equity backers for a practice management group, that they're making huge profit margins. And sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. They're taking over low-performing companies, trying to repackage them. But private equity groups typically aren't the most transparent. And so if I'm a hospital administrator and I'm getting very little transparency from my group that's private equity backed, do you think I'm saying, oh, they're probably running thin margins and passing the money on to the providers and doing the right thing? Or am I going to assume they're running these exorbitant margins and taking money out of this community and all that? So obviously the latter, they're going to assume they're taking too much out. And so they're requiring more transparency of anesthesia groups, and even ones like us that are not backed by private equity. We're a privately owned group, no outside investors, but they want that transparency because the money's just not there anymore in the hospitals. Times are tight right now financially, and they need to hold people accountable for those costs.
Nathan, from your experience, how has the demand for transparency evolved in the healthcare and anesthesia space over the years?
So I've been doing this a long time, and early on it was kind of a shell game when it came to budgets, when it came to revenue, when it came to what the costs actually were for a practice. And I came from a larger corporate entity that did have private equity and venture capital backing. And one of the things that I heard quite a bit over the last 30 years was, I'd like to know, Nate, where every dollar we give you is spent, how it's spent. How do you guys take care of the resources we provide to you? What are you doing with the revenue that's collected? The nice thing about CCI is that we are exceptionally transparent, have been from day one, but it has evolved dramatically over the last 5 to 7 years because of the rapid increase in costs for anesthesia services, the decline in reimbursement from the payers, and then the amount that it takes to actually recruit and provide the service now, which has increased. And so what you're having to do is justify almost your existence from a financial perspective to your client partners, the hospital partners. And through that process, because we are transparent, we're able to not just justify what we do, but show value for what we do and how we work. And I think that because we're transparent and that's built into the core of who we are, our partners feel pretty comfortable being engaged with us.
Alex, how does transparency in anesthesia management build trust between hospital executives and anesthesia providers?
Well, the more transparent you are, the more you're able to weather the tough times. When things are good, there's plenty of providers, there's no shortage of staff, and markets are stable financially, then everything's fine. And that's the time you really need to have that transparency, because if the market shift, if compensation jumps up all of a sudden, maybe another hospital down the street or a couple hospitals have increased their provider rates for anesthesia, and our folks are leaving, we need to have a conversation with the hospital and say, look, this is the competitive environment we're in right now. Let's work together to figure out what we can do with this compensation package. And in the past, they may have been a little bit skeptical of this group's just trying to make more money off of me. They need to boost their margins, that kind of stuff. But now, if you have built that trust through transparency during the good times, then when you come to them, they know you're being sincere about what the need is. And transparency means, don't just take my word for it that we need more money. Here's why. Here's what the market's doing. Here's what your competitors are doing. Here's what our competitors are doing in the market as well. And then once you paint that picture, then they're like, okay, I understand it. And they understand. They want to do what's right for the hospital, for the community, and they realize sometimes it costs a little extra money, but they have to defend it, not just in our conversation with them, but they have boards they have to answer to. The board of directors at the hospital, they have other people they're accountable to. If they're part of a system, they've got a regional guy, they've got people over them, and so they have to be able to build their case too. And so transparency gives us all the information together to make the case for that situation we're in.
Nathan, what are the key financial and operational benefits of transparent anesthesia management for hospital executives?
So it benefits both the hospital executive because they can believe the information that they're being provided, whether it's on the revenue front, it's on the cost front. When you're transparent in the conversations, as Alex said earlier in a point he made, you're transparent from the very beginning. And so when you have to have a critical conversation or you have to discuss a line item in a budget that may need to change, they understand that you're being honest and that you have integrity and that you've been transparent up to this point and you're going to continue that process. So it helps when you're looking at capital budgets for expenditures. It helps when you're looking at costs for the clinical component of the budget. What's it going to cost for an anesthetist or an anesthesiologist over the next 12 to 18 months? It helps when you're looking at revenue. What do we have out there in that 30-day bucket, that 60-day bucket, as it relates to collections? And then finally, it's not just for the hospital execs, it helps with the department and the clinicians too. We don't have golden parachutes, as it were. Everybody that is brought into one of our practices, every anesthetist in a practice is paid the same rate, except for the chief CRNA, who gets a small administrative stipend for that, or the chief of anesthesia. But the anesthesiologists make the same rate, the CRNAs make the same rate, unless, of course, one of the anesthesiologists is subspecialized in doing something different. But we're very transparent in how we treat the anesthetists and the anesthesiologists that we work with. And I think that's exceptionally important. There's no smoke and mirrors. They don't feel like we're hiding anything from them. And I think that's part of the reason that we are so successful.
Remember too, transparency goes beyond just the financial component. Hospitals oftentimes are surprisingly lacking in good data for good decision making. And so if we can provide operational metrics to them, if we're looking at their first case on time starts in the OR, if we're looking at how late their rooms are really running, their ORs are running throughout the day, turnover times, lots of things that you would assume are basic statistics that they should be tracking. Some of them are struggling to get their arms around that data sometimes. And so if we're transparent with that data as well, we can make joint decisions that are in the best interest of the hospital with good information to work from.
In that same line of thinking, Alex, in what ways does transparency impact the decision making at the executive level when managing anesthesia services?
Right. They definitely, because they have limited information, especially if you're, well, I was going to say if you're a smaller hospital, but we've worked with larger hospitals too that are part of major health systems that don't have good access to data. They keep telling us, oh, we're working on that. We're going to get that data eventually, and it's going to be a year or two from now. Or they have a complicated EMR system that is great at capturing data, but they can't pull anything out of it to make decisions with it. And so as an executive, you don't want to just fly blind and make big decisions on what you need to do here, especially if you're talking about building out another operating room maybe at your hospital. It's very expensive to build something out like that. So do you need to build that additional operating room, or are you just not running efficiently in the ORs you have, and can we run a lot smoother? And so they need that data, they need that information to help them make educated decisions.
Well, they need a partner that's going to help align the data with their goals and objectives, right? So as we engage across the entire spectrum, whether it's perioperative assessments, it's surgical, or it's post-surgical follow-up, or stuff that happens in the PACU, you have to be aligned in the way the operations settle out with what is expected from the hospital. And many times, Alex, I think we've seen this over and over, they'll have data, but it'll be bad data. It's not data that they can trust. And we can come in as a third party and look at data and take some national standards and apply it to that data and say, something just doesn't seem right here. And then dig down deeper. And because we're facile both in operations and data collection and data analysis, we can help them get to the bottom of whatever they need done. And so hopefully, through the partnerships that we have nationally, people have seen a good return as it relates to our ability to help them facilitate change based on our ability to analyze data.
You know, and sometimes too, they have good data, but as a hospital executive, they may not know what the data is telling them. They don't know. They'll rely on us, say, okay, this is how many endoscopies we're doing. How many rooms do we really need for this many endoscopies? This is how many hearts we're doing. This is how many this and that. And they may not have a point of reference to know, is that a big number, a small number? Is that one room? Is that 3 ORs? Sometimes they just don't know. And so we bring that expertise to them to say, well, based on our experience, here's what we think you ought to be doing here.
Nathan, can transparency lead to improved clinical outcomes and patient satisfaction, and how do hospital executives see this impact?
Yeah, so I can tell you as a patient, I've been a patient several times, when that anesthetist or anesthesiologist sits down with you prior to the surgery and you sign your consent, you're nervous. And it doesn't matter if you're in the business like we are, or you're someone that isn't as well educated as we may be as to what's going to happen, you're still a nervous patient. And so when someone sits down, and talks to you and explain to you, this is what's going to happen, this is how the procedure is going to work, and here are the expectations afterwards, you're well informed, right? And some of those nerves go away. As a patient, when my expectations are met pre-surgically, surgically, and I won't remember surgically, hopefully, and post-surgically, the satisfaction scores increase. And then what happens as a patient is I've gotten very good service at this hospital. My pain was controlled post-operatively, and I tell my friends, you need to go to this place to get your service. So patient satisfaction is exceptionally important and is at points dramatically affected because of transparency. From the administrative side, when you have patients that are happy, you have surgeons that understand how the anesthetic is going to be performed, what's going to be happening, they're happier. And you've got good throughput, and you're dealing with data that is easy to understand and in a format that you can understand, and you're taught how to interpret that data by CCI, it makes your job that much easier. And I think that at the end of the day, that is what's important, I think, to hospital administrators, is they want to understand the value that they're getting. They want to understand how their dollars are being spent. And they want to understand that they've got a good, safe service that they will have consistently every day a new patient walks through that door.
Alex, how does openness in anesthesia scheduling, resource allocation, and staffing help hospital administrators run more efficient operations?
Well, it's important to be flexible because the best laid plans are there every morning when they start the fire off their ORs, and then things actually happen. Cases come in, traumas come in, add-on cases come in. And so you have to have, it's good to have a good plan for the day, but then you have to have that flexibility to be able to say, okay, we need to adapt a little bit, we need to make changes here and there, we need to flip some rooms quickly, get rooms turned over quickly, and possibly even flip rooms for a certain surgeon who may be backlogged today. And so there's lots of different things you need to do to adjust throughout the day. And then that includes add-ons too. That's kind of an anesthesia chief leadership aspect. They come into play because they're the ones oftentimes that are deciding, okay, here's what the staff's going to do. The surgeon's going to say, I'm doing cases till 10 o'clock at night, right? They're going to make that decision. But somebody has to be the leader of that OR team and that anesthesia team and say, okay, guys, here's the plan of how we're going to do this. You're going to stay late here. You're going to go ahead and go get dinner. You can come back. We'll swap out mid-case. So somebody has to be kind of the one steering the ship throughout the day or into the evening, making sure that we can do everything we need to do. But having the right resources in place, having the right skill sets of providers in place, having the right culture in place, which people forget about culture all the time. It's critically important. If you have a culture where everyone has each other's back, it's collegial, there's a lot of teamwork that goes on, then you can function a lot better under tense situations. If it's fragmented, if people don't really want to be there, and you're letting that culture kind of precipitate throughout the organization, then it's going to be miserable for everybody. No one's going to want to do it. You're going to have turnover. People are going to quit. The hospital administration is going to be mad because the surgeon's going to be mad. He's going to march up to the CEO's office. These guys were a bunch of jerks. I need to get my cases done. So having that teamwork and having the right resources and people in place is critical.
Nathan, how does financial transparency in anesthesia billing, contracts, and compensation provide clarity for hospital leadership?
So I get asked this all the time. What do I get for the dollar I spend with CCI, right? And at the end of the day, administrators are under extreme pressure right now because the cost of service in almost every area in the hospital has increased dramatically since COVID. It doesn't matter what department you're talking about. So we have chosen to be completely transparent as we engage with potential partners. We have chosen to be transparent after we've engaged with new partners and through the entire life cycle. And so what that means to the administrator is I understand for every dollar how much of that dollar is going to direct clinical costs, how much of that dollar is going to CCI. We've seen with payers that payers are covering a little bit less every year, right? And as a patient, though, my premium increases almost every year. And then the payers turn around and pay your anesthesia group less each year. So they're charging more, paying out less, and so they're making more money, right? But they're paying the hospital administrators less. So revenue cycle becomes even more important to your hospital C-suite because they are being impacted directly as a result of the payments being cut. So we are very transparent when it comes to revenue cycle. We have meetings with the C-suite, with the CFO. We look to the group to ensure that things are coded correctly, right? So that when we drop an anesthesia bill, that it's done correctly. And then we look, and we're completely transparent about how we are collecting. We have third parties that bill and collect on behalf of our hospital partners. And so each month, we provide them with reports that show them what's in the 30-day bucket, what's in the 60-day bucket for collections. Are we collecting about where we thought we would be? Are we under? Are we over? And then finally, how do we reconcile that against what was projected initially? And because we are good at what we do, and we've been doing this a very long time, we are normally spot on with regard to projections, provided the data we've gotten has been accurate. And I think that's important to hospital administrators. They need to understand that we're honest when we come in the door, we're honest about what we're projecting, and we're not going to come in under one supposition and then turn around 6 to 9 months later and knowing we've lowballed it and go ask them for more money. It's just not the way CCI does business.
Alex, what role does transparency in cost management and anesthesia service delivery play in controlling hospital budgets?
Well, they want predictable costs because they have to budget for things just like any other organization. And the chief financial officers at the hospital, they want a clear understanding of our costs or any anesthesia group's costs, so they can effectively budget for that. They want to know that you're going to have stability, because then if you have to have locums in there, that throws a wrench in the works sometimes. If you need locums providers, that can cause some unforeseen expenses there on the hospital side. And so having that plan is important, that financial plan. Then there's the other aspects with narcotics usage and stuff. If our medical affairs folks can work with their pharmacy to help standardize some of the narcotics usage that anesthesia does, that can be a significant cost savings for the hospital. And we talked a lot about efficiencies. If we can help their ORs run more efficient overall and get more cases done during the day. Remember, if we're running late into the day, for us, anesthesia is kind of part of the job. You do it, and some days you're out late, sometimes you get out early. But if you have nursing staff and techs, they're getting paid overtime. They get extra pay, overtime hours as employees of the hospital when that happens. And so if we can help the hospital be more efficient, get their cases all done in a reasonable amount of time each day, they avoid those overtime costs as well. So there's lots of areas beyond just anesthesia specific that we can touch on to help the hospitals control their costs a little better.
Nathan, how can a transparent anesthesia model foster stronger collaboration between hospital leadership and companies like CCI?
When you engage with a hospital, you do so under a plan of attack as it relates to the staffing, right? It could be a supervised model. In some smaller hospitals, we have an all-CRNA model. Depends on where you are and frankly, what's right for that particular facility. In every case, CCI is flexible because sometimes the needs of the facility change. And so we're completely open with what we're going to pay the anesthetist or the anesthesiologist, how the department will be structured, and then what we can do long-term to help facilitate better efficiency within the hospital, what we can do to help facilitate better recruitment and retention than they've had previously, and what we can do to provide better patient outcomes through collaboration and complete transparency. And at the end of the day, this is all about patient care. If you take care of the patients first and you do so in a manner that is efficient, compassionate, and repeatable, then the other things kind of take care of themselves. But you got to look at everything through that patient care lens, and then through the effect of being transparent with hospital administration as you staff, as you recruit, and as you change with them, modify the program with them, you're going to be very, very effective.
Nathan, how do you see transparency in anesthesia practice management shaping the future of hospital operations and executive leadership?
I think that for hospital operations and executive leadership to be successful, they have to have data and information that's actionable and accurate. It's our job to make sure that as we're communicating with them and as we're delivering data and reports, that we do so in a timely fashion and that we give them information that they can use to make decisions. It's also important that we make recommendations, I think, as their partner. Many times they're looking to us to manage that department like it's our department. Yes, the CRNAs and the anesthesiologists ultimately represent the hospital to the community and provide that patient care. But what they need from us is a collaborative partnership and advice so that they can make the best decisions for their hospital and their community.
Alex, what trends or innovations in anesthesia management are making transparency more achievable or beneficial for hospital executives?
Well, one big component is, and this has taken place over the last several years, but more reliance on electronic medical records for anesthesia. For the longest time, we had hospitals that were still documenting on paper, just sheets of paper. They're documenting the case, and it's kind of hard to manipulate data when it's just all written out on sheets of paper. And so now we have EMRs in place. All of our sites have EMRs, whether it's the one we use primarily, we have a partnership with. Some of them have Epic, Cerner. There's a lot of different EMRs out there. And so the ability to capture data electronically is critical now to helping them get real-time analytics on what's going on. And you can go beyond that even. There's tools out there that we have partner organizations we work with that can put in a true practice management, OR practice management, data management system in there that really has heat mapping to show you how busy your rooms are throughout the day, what your on-time case starts are, how late you're running, how early you're finishing, breaking it down by surgeon to see which surgeons are more efficient, which ones are just super slow, and it allows you to kind of have some conversations with surgeons also about getting more efficient in the way they operate. And so having a lot more access to data is not a new thing, but it's an evolving thing, because like I said earlier, there's sometimes you have good data and you don't know what to do with it. You don't even know what it's telling you at this point. So that's kind of the next step that we're moving towards now. Okay, now we've got the data, hospital. Now here's what it means. Here's the decisions you should be making from this information. But the more information they have, the more they know, the better decisions they can make. And then having a partner they can rely on to give them recommendations on that. That they're looking to us because they may run just that hospital, right? But we're in 50, 60, 70 hospitals. And so we've got a broader base of information and knowledge on things as to what benchmarks are, what standards are, what things you should be shooting for. And so they're saying, can you guys give me some direction on this? And so because the days of just making sure a hospital is staffed with their anesthesia providers, those are kind of over and done with at this point. They're looking for someone who's a partner that's helping them be proactive and figuring out how to manage effectively, how to prepare for growth, or if they've lost a surgeon, what does that mean? How do we downstaff at this point? And what are the plans for how we downstaff? How do we change things around? And so they really rely on us a lot more than they used to just 5 or 10 years ago to give them good information.
That brings us to the end of today's episode, and what a conversation it's been. A big thank you to our guests, Alex Gorecki and Nathan Yoder, for sharing their valuable insights on transparency in anesthesia practice management. Unmasked is brought to you by CCI Anesthesia, leaders in anesthesia services for over 20 years. Subscribe to Unmasked, the CCI Anesthesia podcast, today so you never miss an episode. For more resources and information, visit the CCI Anesthesia website at ccianesthesia.com. We look forward to having you with us next time as we continue to unveil the remarkable stories and innovations shaping the future of anesthesia care. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.